As we mentioned earlier in the newscast, Prime Minister Trudeau has been in Halifax for the opening of the North American Indigenous Games, and we're happy to have him with us tonight in studio. Welcome.
Thank you.
We also saw you paddling with the Mi'kmaq Chiefs, and you managed to get across Lake Bannock before the rain started.
Any day that starts with a paddle, rain or not, is a good day.
Let me ask you, the Assembly of First Nations held its general meetings here last week, and one of the topics that was brought up was policing. It was also a matter of discussion at the Premier's conference as well. The Toronto Star is reporting the RCMP could transform into an investigative force, not unlike the FBI in the United States. This is in reporting today from the Toronto Star, and I'm wondering if that's something you support.
I think one of the things that we've seen from the multiple reports from the Mass Casualty Commission, from years of reports, is the RCMP needs to do a better job of responding, particularly around community needs. Now, there's a lot of people with different ideas about what that could be, but I think an openness to looking at different models is going to be important, but a conversation with Canadians, with premiers, with municipalities about their future, about the best way to respond to policing is something we have to be having as a country.
Well, you mentioned at the mass casualty inquiry, which is of particular importance here in the Maritimes, obviously said that there should be a new model of policing in this country and a new vision. Is this the vision for the RCMP, that it moves away from community policing?
Well, I think one of the things about the extraordinary work done by the Mass Casualty Commission or inquiry was a really thoughtful look at lines of accountability and who's responsible and who is accountable for various local policing, for national policing, and all those things. I think a mature country needs to have these conversations, and I think they're being had.
Prime Minister, the premiers of Atlantic Canada have been asking for some time for a meeting with you to discuss carbon pricing. Is there any situation in which you see yourself sitting down with them to talk about that?
Oh, I meet with them all the time, but I do know that the finance minister has offered to meet with them, and they're excited to meet with her, and they're going to meet with her or schedule a meeting as soon as she gets back from the G20 meetings in India right now, and I think there's going to be a great conversation about that. But I'm happy to talk about carbon pricing with anyone who wants to talk about it.
Is it set in stone now, or is there movement? Because clearly what the premiers are asking for is some ability to move on carbon pricing.
Well, let's talk first about what it is. This week, actually starting on Friday, people in Nova Scotia started to get their climate action incentive checks. That rebate has appeared in your bank accounts across the province. It's worth about $1,000 a year, almost $250 every 3 months. That'll leave families better off with our plan that is fighting climate change and putting more money back in the pockets of Canadians as we do it. Now, there's been a lot of partisan attacks around this, but the one thing that neither Premier Houston nor Pierre Poilievre or others talk about is the fact that these checks are actually supporting Canadians directly with real dollars that are landing, like I said, in their bank accounts this week.
The parliamentary budget officer says, in fact, Nova Scotians won't be better off.
What actually the parliamentary budget officer says is 8 out of 10 Canadians will be better off on this. What he also talks about is the fact that over the coming years, we're going to see more extreme weather events, more costs on people with rising challenges like that. And being there to supporting people in the extra costs around climate change, you don't have to go far to talk to someone who's been affected by wildfires, affected by Hurricane Fiona. Extreme weather events are a reality. Fighting climate change is a reality. We have to do it in a way that both supports families and prepares us to be competitive and have a growing economy.
Isn't it an incentive, though, for people to get off fossil fuels if, in fact, you're returning the money that you're taking from them? What's the incentive?
Not at all. The price on pollution goes on emitters, goes on businesses, on factories, on companies that are not upgrading to be more fuel efficient, where at the same time, families, for example, if you're a family that lives downtown and can walk to work, you don't use as much, you're still getting $1,000 a year as a family of 4 here in Nova Scotia. If you do have to pay a little more to drive, you're getting that $1,000 a year that can help towards the cost of fuel. It's something that supports families directly. And when Pierre Poilievre or Tim Houston talk about cancelling that, they talk about taking away those checks that are landing in people's bank accounts this week.
Well, one of the things we hear about here in the Maritimes, which tends to be more on the rural side, is that people don't have the opportunity to use those infrastructure projects. We don't have the subway systems. We're not getting the green buses in all the communities. They have no choice but to drive. So for them, it feels like just a compounding tax on top of everything else now, given the interest rates and the cost of living increases.
Well, first of all, that's why there is a 10% top-up for rural people. For rural families, there's a 10% increase to the climate action rebate that is landing this week. On top of that, we have programs like just about up to $10,000 for a family here in Nova Scotia to replace their oil-burning furnace with a heat pump, for example. So there are incentives that are going to help people as we try to do more to reduce emissions, as we stay competitive, as the world is moving in this direction. We're supporting families as we create those great jobs.
Let me turn the focus here for a moment, if I may. Today, Dominic LeBlanc, your minister, is meeting with the Premier Higgs and Premier Houston in New Brunswick, and at the top of that list of discussions will be the Isthmus of Chignecto, that connector between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and the need for it to be protected from sea level rise. They're pretty clear, the premiers, that they are not going to take anything other than a full commitment by the federal government to pay the entire cost of that. They maintain that it's constitutionally enshrined.
Actually, it's a isthmus that has federal responsibilities, but also provincial, also private responsibilities. It's a shared jurisdiction. It's extraordinarily important, but we recognize the importance of it, which is why we're putting $200 million on the table, and the provinces can share the other $200 million. They can get partners like CN that is also really committed to that isthmus to move forward, and they have 2 more days to make an application for that $200 million.
They've both been insistent that they're not going to do that.
That would be unfortunate for the future of people in Nova Scotia if provinces, including Nova Scotia, that has a budgetary surplus right now, isn't going to protect the livelihoods of people when the federal government is coming in with $200 million to do just that.
I know the Premier Houston, who we spoke to late last week, said he doesn't feel Nova Scotians should have to give up that money that would go to pay for health care, that would go to pay for housing, to cover something that he feels the federal government should be paying.
The Premier gets to decide how he spends Nova Scotia tax dollars, but the federal government is willing to be there with $200 million to protect a critical piece of infrastructure, and I really hope he puts in an application in the next 2 days.
So how would you describe the relationship right now between the federal government, yourself, and the Atlantic premiers?
We work together on big things all the time for the benefit of people. Like, for example, on health care, we just put $200 billion down on the table for the next 10 years for investing in healthcare to support frontline workers, to support people getting family doctors, to support on mental health, to support on results and data. And the Atlantic premiers are moving really forward well in a concerted way on those negotiations. We just cut childcare fees in half, and some Atlantic provinces are down to $10 a day. Nova Scotia's not quite there yet, but the 50% reduction in childcare fees that the federal government has done with the province has made a huge difference. So we're able to work on all sorts of big things. We just disagree, for example, on the need to fight climate change and put more money back in people's pockets.
Prime Minister, we certainly appreciate you being here. Thank you for your time today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Todd.
We will take a timeout. We'll be right back with medical and business headlines.